Hello and welcome to the European Resilience Initiative Center video podcast. Today our guest is Benjamin Schmitt. He is a senior fellow at the University of Pennsylvania. Welcome, Benjamin.
Hi, great to be here.
Is it only about increasing control over our very sophisticated and vulnerable infrastructure, or also about creating the new way of delivering goods and commodities in such way which is not so easy to hack, to distort, and to damage?
Well, it's hard to imagine different types of infrastructure for sending electricity. Electricity subsea cables or onshore cables. That's the way we've done, and that's the way we will continue to do it. And I think that when we look at renewables, that's kind of the horizontal challenge of how do we protect renewables. The gut feel is to say that this is much safer than old pipelines, hydrocarbon infrastructure, and things like this. And to an extent, that's true, right? If you build an offshore wind farm, Sergey, and it's got, let's say, 1,000 windmills, it's going to be very difficult for a small sabotage group, whether it's a terrorist group, non-state actor, or it's a state actor, and operating, someone, for example, like our friends over in the Russian Naval Mission Directorate, Subsea Directorate, GUGI, for example. It's going to be difficult to take out all of 1,000 of these. However, there are still choke points in the systems where at the end of the day, you're going to have transmission cables, electricity cables that are going to be sending that electricity to the shore. And so you're going to have kind of the same pathology as you do with electricity interconnectors in the offshore right now, or pipelines right now. And that's not an argument not to do these systems. In fact, we have to if we want to address the climate crisis and get through the energy transition. What I mean is a lot of the energy transition has not yet considered, I think, the concerns about physical security of energy infrastructure. There's been a lot of focus over the past 15 to 20 years on cybersecurity and cyber attacks on these sort of infrastructure, and indeed we continue to have issues with that. We saw even last week a water system in Texas be attacked by a Russian hacking group, causing some water facilities to overflow, and that's terrifying when you really think about it, right? That's critical infrastructure for populations that is a major concern, and so we certainly don't want to overlook the cyber side of things. But I think that in this era, we thought that the idea of physical attacks on these systems, especially from state actors, someone like Russia, was unthinkable, because why would you bother doing something like that if you can easily, with a few swipes of your fingers, mount a cyber attack against energy infrastructure or other critical infrastructure. And so that's why I think that we really have had a wake-up call between the Tromsø to Svalbard Svalsat fiber optic cable system attack in 2022, start of 2022, the Nord Stream attacks, the Baltic Connector attacks, all of these sort of things that have been going on have been wake-up calls that we really have to get back to basics and understand, counter sabotage and counter physical attack pathologies to how we actually respond to these, because this has unfortunately not gone away in the era that we're in right now. In fact, I think it's only become more ubiquitous and becoming more ubiquitous, and it's not been unfortunately thrown away in the dustbin of history from the World War I and World War II sabotage era. So I think that we really need to keep this and keep physical security of energy infrastructure at the front of mind, because we'll never get through the energy transition and build the systems we need and have the political will to get through this if there continue to be cyber attacks, but in particular if there continue to be physical attacks on energy infrastructure that undermines the electorate's support for the measures that are needed to build out infrastructure that gets us from hydrocarbons to a renewable energy future, because they just will see, well, guess what? You're building this infrastructure and it can't be protected, so let's just stay with the status quo, and that's dangerous as well. And I think that there's too many in the area of climate that are unfortunately just not focused on the physical and national security impacts of a lot of what is being proposed. And it's not that they're against it. I think they just need to integrate this, keep integrating these sort of strategies into the broader climate playbook. When I was out on Bornholm as a part of my research project investigating part of the Nord Stream blasts last year, I saw in some farmers' fields there were painted signs against this proposed renewable energy island that is going to be built basically in the offshore near Bornholm in Danish waters, with the justification, at least in terms of the protest signs, that Nord Stream was blown up, right? And so this juxtaposition that a hydrocarbon pipeline that was leaking all this methane is reducing the will of folks to have faith in their authorities, have faith in their governments to build the renewable energy infrastructure we need for the Energiewende. That's really concerning as well, and we need to make sure that these national security and foreign policy strategies are front and center in whatever energy playbook we end up with.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you have already mentioned this quantum leap from the cyber attacks to physical attack that we have seen recently during the last months, to physical attacks on energy infrastructure, which were unthinkable recently, or until recently. The first one was the destruction of Novakhovka dam in Ukraine by the Russian military, which released the largest water reservoir which we have in Europe. And we have seen also hijacking of a nuclear power plant by a state power. The event, which many believed could only happen in a bad Hollywood movie about terrorists, has happened in reality, and not with a terrorist, but with a whole terrorist state, by chance a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council.
Yeah, I think that's really important, Sergey, to look at. I've been really interested in understanding more the strategies and the sort of mitigation measures that Ukrainian authorities have come up with, and they've come up with quite valiantly. There's unfortunately only so much you can do to protect physical infrastructure, in particular fixed infrastructure that are large footprint, older designs from kinetic strikes without sufficient air defense systems, and that's why I've been asked a lot about how do we protect what is the I've kind of asked what's the energy security strategy for Ukraine ever since the large scale invasion happened, and I would say right away air defense, right? And people are asking me that thinking I'm going to come up with some energy for energy policy, right? You have an energy issue, you're going to have an energy policy solution. But the truth of the matter is, the cheapest way that we can support, the resiliency of Ukraine's energy infrastructure is giving them more air defense systems, giving them more Patriots, giving them more HIMARS, supporting the transfer of F-16s to protect energy infrastructure. Because it's one thing when you had as Russia was ramping up its strikes against Ukraine in 2022, you have attacks on smaller infrastructure, power lines, and in substations through the electrical grid and things like this. All civilian infrastructure, I might add. This is all aimed at exacerbating a tragic humanitarian crisis, with, I believe, the hope on the Kremlin side that the Ukrainian people would just get fed up with the energy intermittency or energy poverty that's being created, and as a result, reduce their support for pushing back on Kremlin aggression and continuing the war to defend their nation. And of course, this has failed. The Ukrainian people are standing resolute as they are and have been heroically doing since the start of this large scale conflict. But that has changed because those sort of systems are in some ways modular. A lot of those can be, we've seen energy operators in Ukraine right after strikes going out and fixing these as quickly as possible and doing a heroic job to restore power for the general population, civilian population of Ukraine. But now we're seeing in the past weeks strikes on thermal power plants and larger power plants, things that can't be rebuilt or swapped out or found on the global market quickly and brought to Ukraine to plug in. And so the lack of modularity of those systems that are being destroyed now, that's really concerning, because it's going to create energy poverty for a long time. And so for anyone that says, well, we have to focus at some point on how do we rebuild these systems, defend them now. Give the systems to Ukraine now that they need to defend their skies, so that these don't get struck as much, or hopefully at all, if you give the right type of systems in the right quantities.